and then I'll pass it off to Paul because it sounds like his connection is better than mine. So with that, we'll do our Pledge of Allegiance. And if we all stand for a Pledge of Allegiance, it'd be great. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you with that. And with that, I guess I'm going to pass it quickly over to Paul.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess this is going to be the Catherin show today. So for those of you who don't know her, Catherin Kroll is our resident, as far as I'm concerned, she's the resident expert on COVID. She's got extensive, and so I'll read you a little bit of her bio. The short version is that I don't think there's anybody in Clark County who is better equipped, knowledgeable, and dedicated to dealing with infection prevention. Catherin, she's currently the Director of Infection Prevention at Peace Health Southwest Washington Medical Center. She previously worked for several years at the Clark County Public Health Department. She's taken a leadership role throughout Southwest Washington in bringing together healthcare providers, hospitals, long-term care providers, and public health to address communicable disease control. Her dedication, hard work, and passion for improving the quality and safety of healthcare delivery have inspired her colleagues to be better, more compassionate healthcare providers and public health professionals. There is so much more I could add in there. She is treasurer-elect for the Association for Professionals in Infection Control, chairs the Southwest Washington Healthcare Acquired Infections Task Force, serves on CDM Caregiving Services Board, and is a member of the Washington State Healthcare Acquired Infections Advisory Board, big brother, big sister, big brothers and big sisters of the Northwest. And she just finished remodeling her kitchen.
Oh boy.
Gorgeous. And so, I bow. As Catherin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Paul. And the kitchen is not actually quite finished, but the ovens work and the gas works. And I hear that we're going to have water this week. So, because when you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're director of infection prevention for a healthcare system that spans 3 states, and you're responsible for preventing COVID from spreading in your community and in your hospitals, what you should also do is take your kitchen to the studs, because it's just not, you don't have quite enough going in your life. We had a flood in December, or actually in November, that caused us to need to do some kitchen remodeling. We already had a plan to do a full remodel. So I've been really thankful for all of my friends in the business community connecting us with different folks to do that and letting me glean some of their knowledge, because it was a little bit of unanticipated. So thank you to those in the business community who've helped me navigate that while I continue to navigate this pandemic. So yeah, gosh, I was looking back at my schedule, and it has been almost a year since you guys invited me, and so much has changed. We know so much more about the science now, and we also have a vaccine earlier than some of us would have anticipated, and to be very frank, a lot more effective than many of us anticipated on the front end. So I thought I would start off talking a little bit about where we're at right now in our community with our numbers and what we're doing. Talk about the vaccine, do a little bit of myth busting around some of the crazy things that I hear, talk some about the variants and the challenges with the updated CDC guidance, and then open it up for questions from you guys in terms of what you're experiencing and what things I might be able to answer to help you out. So I am actually starting to get back on the road now and see COVID in our communities. I did a little bit of road time last summer. Those of you who know me know that a decent portion of my time is spent on the road, traveling to the Peace Health 10 hospitals and 157 clinics, and then our home care and hospice program. So I'm fortunate because I get to travel and really go to, in the lean world, what we call the Gemba, see where the work is being done and support that work in its place. And with my team of 26 across these 3 states, really support health in our communities. So our job is to make sure that if you come to a hospital with an infection, in this case, we're talking really specifically about COVID. If you come in with COVID, that we recognize that you have COVID and that we prevent it from spreading to other people, including other patients and healthcare workers. And that if you don't come with an infection, that you don't take one home with you, or that you don't acquire one while you're here. So that is the work that I do in a nutshell. And it's seems like it's easy to kind of sum up and give my elevator speech on it, but the day-to-day has been fairly intense. So I am sleeping better at night right now. So let me start there. One of the things that allows me to sleep a little bit better at night is the fact that we have a vaccine. So we are currently in Southwest Washington. It is not a media hoax. We are in the 4th wave of COVID. So we are experiencing increased hospitalizations across Oregon and Washington. This was a predicted wave. There's actually a phenomenal epidemiologist, statistician out of OHSU, who I follow. And I joke that I'm going to take him to Vegas with me because he's straight on with these predictions in terms of how the waves are going to work. And he has different predictions based on variants and whatnot. But he's really been spot on. So this 4th wave, we knew about it. It's been predicted since January, February, when we were really in the middle of our or coming off of our 3rd wave. And the 4th wave is partially due to variants. So there is a strain of the virus. Well, there are several different variant strains out there. And there is one that has become the predominant strain in Washington. The good news is that it is susceptible to the vaccines. The bad news is that it is much more contagious than the original strain was. So it looks to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% more contagious. We don't fully understand the science yet of why it's contagious. Anyone who tells you that they know why it's more contagious is doing some nice guessing. And it might even be some scientific guessing, but it's truly a guess at this point. We are hypothesizing that it is better able to hang in the air and be quote unquote airborne. So this is a really challenging virus to control. It is clearly much more contagious than influenza. I'm incredibly thankful to say that we have now made it through an influenza COVID season. And I have to tell y'all, last fall, I just had this terrible worry that we were going to see our hospitals overrun with people with co-infections with influenza and COVID. Fascinating. We had less than 5 co-infections hospitalized across our entire Peace Health system. So it was really rare. And our hospitalizations for influenza plummeted this last year. And, you know, there's been a lot of jokes and I've seen memes going around of, hey, we've cured flu. Well, we didn't cure flu. Flu's still around. But what we did was mask and social distance. And masking and social distancing prevents the spread of flu. It prevents the spread of flu much more effectively than it prevents the spread of COVID. We also had flu vaccines available, and the uptake of influenza vaccine this year was much better than it has been in the past because people were concerned about getting flu and COVID. So we've got both of those things going on at the same time. The other thing that we know is that in healthcare, we've always used masks to prevent the spread of influenza. And we've known that was an effective tool forever. You know, it's interesting when I had a niece who went through cancer treatment. For the 2 weeks before she went through, or before I went to visit her, I would always wear a mask when I was out in public. And it was fascinating, the reaction, like, oh, are you afraid of me? Are you sick? You must be sick, or I must be sick. You must think I'm a leper. I had really like kind of negative interactions with people. And so I'm hoping one of the things that can come out of this pandemic is that we have less of those negative interactions, because I do think that there will be ongoing recommendations for people who want to better protect themselves from these respiratory viruses to be masked during influenza season. It is not uncommon in many countries, especially in Southeast Asia, to wear masks during flu season. And they actually see a lot lower rates of hospitalization and severe outcomes because of that masking. And it's totally socially acceptable there. So I'll be curious to see if we're able to achieve a level of it being socially acceptable here in the US going forward. So that's a little bit about what we're currently seeing. So our hospitalizations are not at an all-time high by any means. Our all-time high for hospitalizations really was in late December, early January here in Southwest Washington. That was driven by the fact that we did not have vaccine readily available to anyone who wanted it. People were crowding indoors, the holidays had happened, Thanksgiving happened. We saw a rise right after Thanksgiving, and it just never came down until mid-January, almost into February, before we really got our numbers down. So now we're seeing numbers that are about half as high as they were then. So they're certainly not as low, but our average daily census at Southwest is hovering around 20 to 25 patients with COVID. So manageable, but there are also a lot of other patients who need care in the community. And so this whole question of, well, you know, there's not that many COVID hospitalizations, and do I really need to get my vaccine? And what does that mean? All of those things are really playing into challenges that we're having, because if we have to reduce, COVID patients require more nursing staff. They need more nursing time. They need more respiratory therapist time. They need more doc time. And so when we look at that, and we need to devote more of that, it makes it harder to staff things that we in healthcare consider elective. Now, what we consider elective, sorry, the light just went out in my office. I gotta move around apparently. There we go. What we consider elective is not, in the healthcare setting, is really hard to tell someone that we consider that elective. Like if you have been limping around on a bum hip and you finally have a surgery date, and we are too overwhelmed at the hospital, we don't have enough staffing to take care of you, we'll cancel your surgery. Those are the first surgeries that get canceled, are any quote unquote elective procedures. That procedure might be life-changing for you, but you're not gonna die if you don't get it. And so I think there's this misunderstanding among people of, well, if I don't get vaccinated, what impact does that have on the community? Or if I get hospitalized, that's not really a big deal for me or my neighbors. And that not understanding the downstream impact. So as we enter this fourth wave, we're expecting the number of hospitalizations to peak somewhere in the next couple of weeks, towards the end of May. And then we expect it really drastically to go pretty far down. We always see respiratory viruses down during the summer. We saw it with COVID last year. There was respiratory viruses. There's a reason that we have respiratory virus season, and it's the season when we all hang out inside together. And so when we're all outside, it's just so much less likely that you are going to come into contact with COVID. So we're expecting a relatively low-key summer. I have instructed all of my folks to get vacations in here very soon. Yes, fingers crossed, Paul, for sure. Because I want them to get the opportunity to have a good vacation before next fall, because there are real concerns. And one of the real concerns is that vaccine is now available for everyone who wants it in our community. If you want to be vaccinated, you can be vaccinated. There is still a really large portion of our population who, for multiple reasons, have chosen not to be vaccinated. And that choosing not to be vaccinated means that we will not get to herd immunity through vaccination. It means that we will get to herd immunity through a combination of vaccination and natural infections, which means that we will next fall likely see hospitalizations rise for this. The concern, for COVID and influenza co-infection, and that still is together depending on how well we're practicing our social distancing and masking and what that looks like into the fall. So it is likely that those of us who work in healthcare will be masked at least through next flu season. And so continuing to have that is really challenging. So for me, I am still trying to really understand where are we going next and predict that, but also recognizing that in predicting that, I don't have a magic 8 ball, and anyone who tells you exactly what's going to happen this next year isn't speaking with any sort of authority in terms of knowledge. This virus is still novel. So let me tell you about a couple of things that we have discovered and really understood about this virus over the last year. One of those things is that the virus is really rarely spread through surfaces. Doesn't mean that you should be wandering around licking surfaces just out of spite. But what it does mean is that it really takes person to person for the majority of this spread to happen. And we also know that the majority of the spread happens from droplets. So droplets are when you respire droplets out of your mucosal membranes, your nose and your mouth, and most of those fall out within 6 feet. So they're heavy, I like to call them fat pieces that come out of, as opposed to really skinny pieces of virus that can float in the air. Droplets generally fall and within 6 feet of you, and people are not infected by those. What we do know is that COVID can sometimes be aerosolized. And so some people seem to be more effective at aerosolizing it than others. And we're calling those super spreaders. I don't love that term, but it is what it is, but we're calling them super spreaders in our community. So some people seem to just be incredibly infectious and able to put it out there. And so it's probably a combination of that they have a high viral load in their body, and that when they cough or sneeze, they cough and sneeze petite drops, which petite drops mean they can hang in the air, and that then people who are farther than 6 feet away and unmasked have a higher risk of being infected. We're still learning more about those and what that means for our communities. And it does appear that maybe some of these variant strains are better at doing that. But we just don't totally understand that. So that's a little bit about where we're at and the spread and what we know and the change. What I do want to talk about are a few myths that I keep hearing about the vaccine out there. So the first myth is that the vaccine can give you COVID. Now, I want to be really clear that the difference between the vaccine might make you not feel great and give you COVID are two very different things. So the vaccine cannot give you the virus. It does not contain live virus. It doesn't even contain whole genome of the virus. It contains small pieces of the protein in the virus, which then your body is able to make immune antigens for, or antibodies. So the challenge there is that people think that they can get the virus from the vaccine, or they've heard that, and it's not true. Neither can you test positive for the virus, or will the vaccine cause you to test positive for the virus? So we had a gentleman come in for surgery a few weeks ago, and he was certain that the reason that he was COVID positive was because he'd had the vaccine a few days prior. So we were explaining to him that that's not how it works. You can't test positive. You don't shed virus. Now, it's confusing because vaccines are really complicated and they run the spectrum. There are some vaccines that are live attenuated vaccines, but this is not one of those vaccines. This is not live virus. It's not whole genome. You cannot test positive and you can't get COVID from it. Will the vaccine potentially make you feel not amazing? Absolutely. So, my personal experience was that I felt pretty darn tired and was body achy. And I've heard it run the gamut from people who were severe body aches and fever to people who were like, yeah, I didn't have really any reaction at all. What's funny is I actually know someone who had very little reaction at all to their COVID vaccine and then went and got their second shingles shot and felt horrible with that second shingles shot. And so, it's not just the COVID vaccine that can make you feel not well. And that's actually, I like to say to people, hey, your immune system's working then. You know that your body is working to fight it off. And that is one of the ways in which we know that you're building those antibodies. So there is a test that's available to tell you whether or not you've developed antibodies and so therefore immunity. Does everyone who gets vaccinated get immunity? Gosh, I wish that was the case, but we have no vaccines that are 100% effective for everyone. It's not unusual to have a vaccine that isn't 100% effective. What's fantastic is that with the Pfizer vaccine, we're seeing the model showed that it would be about 95% effective, and we're actually seeing really high effective rates in the 90s, potentially as high as 95 efficacious. So that's amazing to me, on the first vaccine out. The Moderna vaccine also has really high rates. And so the majority of people who get it, a vast majority, over 90%, are getting immunity, it looks like. J&J is not as effective, but it's certainly not a bad vaccine. People ask me all the time, well, what's the right vaccine to get? And I say, well, if you have a choice, it's the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna vaccine are my top two choices, but the right choice is whatever vaccine you can get in your arm, whatever is available to you. Now all three are pretty widely available. And so people have choices. Earlier on, it was whatever vaccine you can get is the right one to get, because that's going to help us get that higher immunity, and so that we can open back up and be more around each other. The other piece about the vaccine is this mRNA technology. Everyone assumes that, this is the first time mRNA technology has ever been approved. So this is highly experimental in humans. That's actually just not true. So here's why. mRNA vaccines have made it through a lot of clinical trials in the past for humans. They are not new to us in the healthcare world. What's the challenge is that they are incredibly expensive, not just to manufacture, but because they have to be stored. They're a quote unquote temperamental vaccine. They have to be stored at these really cold storage lows. Most places didn't prior to COVID have the ability to store vaccine like that. And so getting a vaccine to market for something that might have either another vaccine already available for it that's easier to store, or that has other benefits to it. A lot of it was an economic decision. And when you take out the economics, when you say, okay, we don't care what it costs, we're going to make it available. Well, all of a sudden it is, in the face of a pandemic and the economic uncertainty that a pandemic was giving us, this is absolutely, we are willing to build these deep freezes and supply them and get them out there. So The challenges around that, it was really an economical, and it wasn't the most economically responsible vaccine available in the past. But it doesn't mean that mRNA vaccines hadn't been in human trials and hadn't been highly effective in human trials. They just had never been able to get a major manufacturer to pick them up to mass manufacture, because keeping that cold chain is really expensive, and vaccine waste happens not infrequently. So we'll have, when I manage the vaccine program for Clark County Public Health, you would have supplied vaccine to a clinic in the community, and overnight their freezer went out of range, and gosh, well, now we have all the vaccine in that freezer isn't able to be used anymore. And so it would be wasted. And that's really a challenge, right? So keeping the storage of these has been incredibly, incredibly difficult, but we've shown we can do it. So I wouldn't be surprised if more mRNA vaccines come to market now as well. Here's why. Because now all of us around the world, around the United States anyway, have the capacity to store these. We invested heavily in the infrastructure to be able to store these, and invested heavily in the transportation of how to do it right and safe. And so it's going to be less of an economic lift in the future to have these vaccines come to market. So that's a little bit about the vaccines, where we're at. They're widely available. What's the other myths that I've been hearing? There is the really crazy far out one of the mRNA can change your DNA. And I'm like, gosh, I can't even begin to help with the science on that. Like there is so no way fundamentally that's how that works. But we are DNA based humans, are DNA based. This virus is RNA based. Your body does make RNA and translate it back into DNA. Your body's really good at that. Your body is also really good at detecting mutations and killing those cells. And so your body is constantly finding cells that have made errors in that transcription back and forth and killing them. If your body didn't do that and wasn't really good at that, we would have incredibly, incredibly high rates of cancers, because that's typically what has happened when we have many cancers, is that you've been exposed to something that has changed the way that your cells are replicating, and they start replicating out of control, and your body doesn't get on that and kill it fast enough. Your immune system doesn't. So your immune system is already wired to kill errors. And this is not inserting something new in that's just going to proliferate. That's not how this works. It actually doesn't insert into your DNA or RNA at all. What it does is attract antibodies that will kill it. So going back to this test of immunity, like how do I know that I got immunity after getting vaccinated? Because not everyone does. Well, there are antibody tests, but here's what I say about antibody tests. They are really important for some people to get, not for everyone. The vast majority of people who get vaccinated, we're going to know statistically that you built immunity to it. People who have immune deficiency diseases or have had organ transplants, things like that, those are folks that we're more interested in testing to see if they got immunity, because their immune system functions differently than most people's. And so we're trying to understand if we're helping that immune system build in the right way, or if it's possible that they are not getting immunity and we need to change how the vaccine might target for them. So there are groups that benefit from it. Here's the other challenge. When we're talking about antibodies and antigens, we're looking at a lock and a key situation. And in order to test for the key, if we're thinking about the antibody and what gives you immunity is the key, you have to know what the key looks like. We are still figuring out what all the keys that fight COVID look like. So what I say to folks is, go ahead, if you want to get the antibody test, knock yourself out. If it's positive, you'll feel really good about it. If it's negative, that's not a cause for panic, because right now we only know a few of the keys that we're looking for. But we also know that our immune systems are more complicated than that. And it's going to take years of us really refining this test to say that it is absolutely for certain telling us whether or not you have immunity. So a negative antibody test isn't necessarily indicative of you not having immunity. So, you know, if you're not going to, we in the healthcare field aren't going to do anything differently with you at this point. We're not going to revaccinate you. But if you want to get tested, it's available. It's kind of expensive. Your doc can order it, but there's not, I don't see a huge value clinically in doing that. You know, again, that's the world according to Catherin Kroll. It is not gospel, but that's my personal opinion, my professional opinion. And then last, I just want to mention the CDC guidance. So just like you, as you were experiencing the ebb and flow of CDC guidance last year and the do this, oh God, now pivot, do this, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, we don't know. We were experiencing the same thing in healthcare, and it's been really challenging. And then the other layers that go on top of it, which you as business folks are all also experiencing, are the layers from the governors, so local, state, public health officials, state public health officials, state elected officials, and all of the mishmash that goes in between, and everybody wants to give their own guidance. So it's been incredibly challenging to navigate some of that. So what I can tell you right now is that the research shows that it is very safe for vaccinated people to gather in small gatherings with other vaccinated people. And if you want to add unvaccinated people into the mix, what you want to do is make sure that they are not themselves high risk, or that they don't live with someone who is high risk, because obviously household contacts are incredible risk if one of them gets sick. What we're really seeing is that the immunization, even if it doesn't protect you against getting the disease, it protects you against being hospitalized of it. So I have a national study that I'm going to tell you about, but then I also have a local example of it as well. So we had, well, let me tell you the national first. The national study is that there was a skilled care facility, nursing home setting, and they were opening back up to visitors, and a visitor came in who had COVID. And COVID spread through the facility. But the first thing that happened was people who were vaccinated were about 85% less likely to get sick, that to develop symptoms of COVID. And they were 95% less likely to be hospitalized than their peers who were not vaccinated. And this is in our population last year, that if you got COVID into a skilled care facility, we probably all remember the heartbreaking headlines of it just going through and wiping out people in that age range and in that immune status. It was absolutely devastating. Peace Health runs a long-term care facility up in Ketchikan, and my biggest fear was that we would get COVID in our long-term facility up there, and it would just blow through it and devastate those folks. So the good news is that we didn't. And then we also, so I saw that on the national data that's peer reviewed, but I've seen this anecdotally twice as well. So we have had 2 outbreaks in communities that I serve through my role in Peace Health in long-term care facilities. And in both of those situations, the people who needed hospitalization, it was incredibly rare that someone needed hospitalized. It was very rare that they developed symptoms, but you always test everyone in the long-term care setting when you find a case of COVID. So we were testing regardless of symptoms, and we were finding people who were asymptomatic, but who were not sick and who'd been vaccinated. And those were folks that we would have expected would have had a pretty severe outcome if not for that. So that is heartening to me to see that both published nationally, but then to experience that locally. I keep track every day, look to see if anyone in any of our 10 facilities has been admitted with COVID, from a post-acute care setting. And it's actually quite rare nowadays to find those post-acute care admissions because that's where the vaccine was first available outside of healthcare. And those are the folks who are at highest risk. So we've got our best immunity built up there. So my hope is that we see that now play into other settings and soon, hopefully, into schools. So last, I want to talk a little bit about what's driving the fourth wave. Well, driving the fourth wave is at least in some part due to infections and spread in children. And so people ask me, well, is this because we opened our schools back up? And, I can't directly attribute it to opening schools back up. But what we do know is that when our schools opened back up, we did see a huge increase. At one point, there was a week where there were 80 active outbreaks that were happening across the state of Washington in school-age children. And so certainly that's a concern. Do not take that as me saying we shouldn't have our schools open and shouldn't be doing this. I think that one of the things that I had mentioned when I spoke to groups before was I was really thankful that I was not in charge of making that decision, because weighing the mental health needs of children and educational needs of children with the unlikely event that they would have a severe health outcome is a really tough one to make, but what we do know is that children live with adults and often interact with adults who are in those high risk categories. And certainly right now locally, there is a lot of play being given on the media to a 46-year-old teacher who died with no pre-existing health conditions out of Estacada. So it's not that it doesn't happen and that there aren't consequences. It's that balancing as a community, what's our acceptable level of infection? What are we willing to accept for infection? What are we willing to accept for hospitalizations and death? This disease really is going to move in from pandemic to endemic soon. So pandemic, it is kind of our high alert. Endemic is where we are like, okay, this is the level that we just expect to see transmission at in our communities every year, and especially with those who don't accept vaccination. So then the last thing that I'm going to share before I open it up is I get a lot of questions about, are we going to is this going to be like influenza? Are we going to have to get a vaccine every year? We don't know yet. So it doesn't look like it right now. As the strains are emerging, the reason that we have to get influenza vaccine every year is that the influenza virus changes so much every year that we need to show our body what it looks like. And that sometimes it's similar to a previous virus that our body might have seen, or vaccine might have been similar previously, but it's just not quite there. And so we need to give our body, here's what it looks like, because in order to build those keys, they have to know what the lock is. They got to know what they're trying to fit. And so with COVID right now, the keys that we're doing seem to be effective against the variants. Now, if the variant does not continue, if it mutates and is not able to do that, well, then possibly. So it's possible that we'll get a whole set of COVID viruses and different strains of COVID, and that we'll have to look and see what's spreading and that get boosters based on what's spreading. But at this point, we don't have enough information to say that's absolutely going to be the case. And I think next flu season, respiratory viral season, will really tell us more about that. It will have been here for almost 2 years at that point, and looking at the mutations and what goes forward. But at this time, we just don't know if we're going to need boosters or if we're going to need annual vaccinations. So that is a lot of information that I've just thrown at you. But I really am thankful for the opportunity to be here today and to share some of my knowledge, and I'm happy to take questions and support what you guys have for needs in the business community.
Okay, Mike.
If you have a strong reaction to the second shot, or you have no reaction to the second shot, is there a difference in the immunity?
We don't know yet. So they're collecting that data. So there is the hypothesis that the strong reaction means that you're making more antibodies, but a lot of it depends on you and what your immune system looks like in the first place. Some people who are having the strong reactions are actually people who've had COVID already. And so their body already knew what it looked like. And so the strong reaction is because the body already knew what it looked like and it had all these keys and it's throwing all of these keys at the lock. And so therefore the reaction is higher. So that's been really interesting. One thing I also didn't mention, but should, is that even if you've had COVID, lab confirmed COVID, you should still get the vaccine. We're actually finding there is an entire service line up at UW that has been opened up to treat post-acute COVID. So people who were really sick from COVID, and that's one of the things that they're finding is that we have COVID long haulers, people who are continuing to have symptoms and just not feel great long term. And that when those folks get vaccinated, they find actually that many of those long haul symptoms are abated.
So if my sound doesn't go out too much with that, people who have had COVID do they get immune to it, or is the belief is that they get immune to it because they had it and they survived, but then do they need to get I had it, I don't need it because now my body is used to it?
Yeah, so I'm
guess
going to guess it a little bit. I'm going to guess a little bit because you were in and out there, but what I'm going to guess you were asking was what's the theory around having had it and immunity. So what we are finding is that it looks like your body might wane some immunity after the natural immunity to it. And so there some people who've had COVID absolutely are getting those long-term antibodies. It's a different type of antibody that we look for. And some people who've had COVID aren't. And right now we're not able to predict who does and who doesn't. We just don't have enough data yet to know that correlation. But what we're also finding is that with these long haulers, people who are no longer infectious with COVID, but probably still have the COVID virus running around their system causing havoc, that getting vaccinated gives their body that boost to fight it off and to eliminate it.
Cool. Hey, I'll offer anecdotally, Maureen went to Minnesota a year ago. So it's the end of February, beginning of March, comes back on a flight that had come in from overseas, God knows where, sick like a dog for 3 days, then okay. When she got her vaccine, first shot, sick like a dog for 2 days, and same thing with her second shot. So anecdotally, we keep thinking she's of the opinion she had COVID a year ago. So I'll just throw that out.
Yeah, that is really interesting, Paul. And certainly I hear a lot of those anecdotal stories. I know that some of the healthcare workers who had COVID and got vaccinated certainly had really nasty symptoms after they got vaccinated. But one in particular, who I know of anecdotally, who was having long-term respiratory, just still feeling short of breath and just not quite able to get back to her pre-COVID health, is now all of her metrics are back with that because she got vaccinated, and that's what we believe is the reason.
Okay. Oh, I got a question.
Catherin.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So I know you kind of touched on it, and if I'm correct, what you're going to tell me is it's too soon to tell. So I got vaccinated in February. I'm planning to fly to Mexico in late October, come back the first week in November. Really want to be immune. But is there any thought about giving extra boosters, or I think what you basically said was we don't know yet.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to give you a really clear answer on that. We don't know. I too am planning a trip to Mexico at the end of this year, and hoping that the variant strains and that will be safe to travel. I think that it is likely within a month of your travel, you'll be able to have a better idea about what variant strains are spreading, what does that look like, and what's the safety level on that. So I've been telling all of my friends who are purchasing, especially international type travel stuff, I'm not usually the person who purchases like the extra insurance or pays more for the or for the refundable ticket, but I've been advising folks to do that because we just don't know what it's going to do and change, especially with what we're seeing out of India right now with the really the variant strain that's happening there that appears to have a higher mortality rate. Now, again, comparing socioeconomic status and all of those things is it's just not comparable. So understanding what that would look like in the United States still uncertain.
I heard somewhere NPR or something like that, and they were saying that they've been looking at mixing your vaccines. What are you hearing? That mixing your vaccines is less effective, more effective, or just not advised?
Well, it's just not advised at this point because it hasn't been well studied. They are studying that to see. At this point, both of the manufacturers of the vaccines that are available in the US are able to keep up with the demand. So there's no need to mix them. Early on, there was some component shortages and things like that. And so it was like, well, gosh, should we start mixing these, or should we just concentrate on getting one dose in everyone and then worry about a second dose? At this point, honestly, you guys, we have appointments available every day. There are plenty of appointments available. If you want to be vaccinated, you can be. And it looks like by the end of today that it will be approved for 12 to 15-year-olds. So ACIP, the national group that makes recommendations for vaccines, it's already gone through FDA and been approved. And so the 12 to 15-year-olds. The other thing that we're seeing is many places are requiring vaccine now. So universities, in order to be able to return back on campus, it is interesting. So in the healthcare field, we actually can't require vaccine because there are some laws on the books driven by the labor unions that don't allow us to require vaccinations. So it's always fascinating. Everyone wants to know, oh yeah, all of my healthcare workers are absolutely vaccinated, aren't they? And we have a high vaccination rate. We're approaching 80%, but not everyone has chosen to be vaccinated. I had to have some healthcare services in February, and I requested that only people who were vaccinated care for me, and that you have the right as a patient to do that. I'm not recommending that that's the right thing for you. You do what's right for you. But for me, it was important. And I liken it to this, which is that I want to be cared for by healthcare professionals who believe in science. And so the science on this in the healthcare field is really good. And so my reasoning behind that, and I also, I work in healthcare and I feel very empowered to say those things. Receiving healthcare is a really vulnerable place to be in. And so not everyone is comfortable advocating for themselves in that way. I just happen to be and happen to know that. But I think that there is an assumption that everyone in healthcare is vaccinated, and we have the same vaccine hesitancy issues that other people have, and that we're seeing across the community. Not nearly as high of rates, like I said, we're approaching 80% vaccinated, but certainly not everyone is.
Hey, Catherin, great presentation, very informative. Thank you. Is this different form of, COVID, SARS, whatever you want to categorize it, is it here forever? That's part A. And part B, how come we're seeing such a push on the vaccine narrative and we don't really hear much on promoting like overall health and wellness within, our population?
Yeah, so I think the first piece is likely. Yeah, I think coronaviruses have been with us for, years, and this is just a new strain of it. So this is not like it, we've never seen a coronavirus before. Coronaviruses before just caused something that was more like the common cold. And so it's likely that this virus is going to be, that eliminating it would be hard without eliminating the vector in which it spreads, but not impossible. So we probably need to understand more about the animal models. One of the reasons that we can't eradicate like influenza is that it spreads through other things besides just humans, and that we've been able to eradicate smallpox was because humans were the only model for it, and so you couldn't get it from animals, and there was no new emerging technology. Or one of the big challenges with flu is that influenza, when it jumps back and forth between species, it actually in pigs and birds can be mixing vessels for it and give us brand new strains that humans haven't seen before, and therefore have this. The second part, I think, is a really interesting question. This is one of our bigger challenges, is that for years, public health folks have been promoting general health and wellness. And there's this real personal accountability piece to that, right? And how do we do that? So I think that it's that it is still there, and it's still incredibly important, because your immune system and how wonderful your immune system works does have some personal responsibility on it. The amount, what you put in your body, how you put it in there, exercise, all of those things can help build your immune system. In addition to, but doing all of those things doesn't guarantee that you won't get or spread COVID. And so the vaccine strategy is really around the community view, and the health strategy is really around your individual, if that makes sense, because individuals are responsible for their individual health and being as healthy as they can be to help them individually fight it. And then the other piece is individuals are part of communities, and as being part of a community, you have this responsibility to not spread virus that other people don't want. And so the best way to stop the spread in the community is through vaccination, and the best way to keep yourself healthy and safe is by doing those personal things. So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's a good explanation.
Hey, Catherine, I had a question come in via the chat to me to ask, how many waves can we look forward to? I mean, what's the anticipated kind of rolling? And then kind of to piggyback off that, what is the kind of the metric that is going to help us? If we can meet this, then we get kind of back to life. As we know this has kind of fundamentally changed everything, and seasonal masking and some stuff like that. But what that I guess magic metric has consistently changed is, do we have an idea of what that's actually going to be now that we're so far into this?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to what are we going to consider endemic versus pandemic level. So it's this want to get back to normal. Like I am 100% with you. I don't cook. I miss eating out, all of those things. And I've been slowly but surely, takeout is just not as good as being there at the restaurant, right? And there are so many other things that I miss. I miss getting my nails done. And so I'm there with you in trying to get back into that. And how do we do that safely? In terms of new waves, the challenge is that we don't have any more waves predicted for the summer. No one is predicting a big wave this summer. And here's my caveat that I'll offer with that is no one's predicting a big wave unless this virus does some sort of crazy mutation that makes it resistant to the vaccine. It has not demonstrated that it's going to do that. I do not personally believe that's going to happen, but that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. So I don't know that for sure, right? But none of the scientists are predicting a big wave for this summer. We're all predicting relatively endemic levels. We're all also predicting a wave next fall. And what we don't know is how is that wave going to look with flu season? Because we are predicting a wave when we all come back together indoors. But by that time, at least down to 12-year-olds will be eligible for vaccine. So we'll do that. Hopefully we'll get a vaccine that's safe and effective in our kiddos, our school-age kiddos. And that is really the point at which I think that we will, as a society, be able to get back to more quote unquote normal, is when there is vaccine available for anyone school age and older. And that's likely when we're going to be able to then have low enough spread that we're not overrunning our hospitals, that we are not saying, sorry, I can't give you guys your surgeries because we've got too many beds full, that sort of thing. So that's my prediction. There are other scientists who hold that same prediction. I think it is well reported in the science, but don't go out there and say that Peace Health said that. Okay.
Good, thank you.
Hey, Catherin, I have a question. I know that most of our emphasis has been on the vaccine. Are there other countermeasures as far as treatment being investigated as we speak now? I mean, I know we've got remdesivir and then the multi-antibodies treatment as well, but it seems like, have we stopped at that, or are they still working on the treatment side? Because that certainly can wipe this out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the vaccine side has gotten all the play, right? But it absolutely, because in the pipeline, we want to prevent illness. When we look at in healthcare, you always want to go upstream and do whatever prevention work you can, and then you move down to the other pieces. And so treatment is considered a downstream, but it is certainly part of the puzzle and absolutely continues to be investigated. We're actually working on piloting these. So the monoclonal antibody therapy has been shown to be really effective if you can it's really effective if you can catch someone early in the infection and get them before they get sick enough that they need hospitalization and keep them from coming into the hospital. It's challenging because oftentimes people don't seek care early enough to meet that. And so there are additional antivirals that are being looked at. And right now the monoclonal antibodies are infusions. And so that's really challenging to implement. And so oral antivirals are probably where part of the key is at. And those are being heavily invested in with good studies going on right now as well, Darren.
Thank you.
Well, Tony, how's your phone doing? Where's Tony?
Well, I'm here. I turned the video off. Is the sound any better?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. So,
Yeah.
okay, good. So you just can't see my face, but you can hear me. That's good. Okay. So anyway, well, thank you very much. I mean, I'm sure there's way more questions
Oh, there are.
for us, but we've reached our time on that. I do want to say, thank you for giving us that information. And if we have you back next year, it'll be on a different topic.
And hopefully it'll be live.
And it'll be
Your
live.
lips, yeah, your lips to God's ears.
Exactly.
Take care, y'all. It was great to see
And
you.
Catherin, hopefully we can buy you lunch next year.
Yeah, yeah. And normally
I'm in.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, and normally our meetings, we do have some recognitions of our members and things where we kind of went over our time. So Adam, I want to give you some time next meeting to tell us about Fusion CBD on there, as well as some other announcements. So be prepared. June 12th is the Hazel Parade. It's virtual, so at least we won't be blocking any traffic this year again
Hallelujah.
on that.
Have a good one, everybody. Back
Oh,
to
okay.
back.
All right, we'll see you guys.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.